So Cameron, we touched on this a little bit, and you had a look of horror across your face, because I talked about opening and closing charter schools willy-nilly, but this obviously is a serious topic that we need to talk about. What's happening here with charter schools?
Well, willy-nilly doesn't cover it. So the statistics are in my opinion, pretty damning. 5% of charter schools close within their first year. 21% of charter schools close within 5 years, and fully 1/3, 33% of charter schools close within 10 years. Now, those numbers don't say when they close, but it can run the gamut. There are any number of examples of charter schools that close mid-year. Mm-hmm. And so then we talked about the October count and the funding. All those students return to public schools. There are charter schools who have closed days before the school year begins. Think about the effect on students. I mean, this is this is a horrible thing for kids to have to go through. So, yeah, the survivability of charter schools is not great. I mean, again, put that. Would taxpayers agree with, I don't know, funding NASA if, you know, a third of your product may not work after 10 years? Or, I mean, I just can't believe that if those numbers were public consumption, that people would think this is a good spend of public money.
It seems to me, in many respects, that maybe the law surrounding the funding of schools needs to be revisited. This October rule, do you know when this October rule actually was implemented?
I don't. I mean, I've been teaching.
It's one of those things. But of course, when there were just public schools, it was less of an impact.
It was less of an impact because you weren't losing that money. So
yeah, because you'd have people joining the school, you'd have people leaving the school,
right,
so it would stay pretty flat.
Well, and the October count was a means of ensuring that every school in the district was adequately funded for the students that were there.
Right.
Now we're talking about something slightly different. We're talking about how much of the money that is in that school district now goes to potentially a organization, an educational organization that's not accountable to the school district and the taxpayers, because those are the taxpayers. The school district are the taxpayers' elected representatives in the school board. And so if there's no transparency, if there's no accountability between those two entities, the taxpayers lose their oversight of their money, of their investment in education, and that's not a great deal.
Yes, I mean, pre-charter schools, student movement would have existed, but again, it would even itself out across the course of a year. But if a charter school closes in January, say, and let's say it's got 300 pupils, that is one hell of a hit to the public schools that are now going to have to absorb somehow those 200 students.
Correct.
I mean, how do they do it?
Teachers will work without planning periods. They call it an overload. You will have more kids in a classroom. You maybe won't be able to fund the initiative where every student gets an iPad and you go back to buying textbooks. I mean, you find the money and you do it.
And you do it.
You have to. What you're not going to see, I mean, you are not going to see kids turned away from public school. That's not who we are. That's not what we do. That's not what the public has invested in.
Right.
Those kids will be taken care of. But the strain that's put on our public school system because of that is immense. And can be paralytic. In fact, there was a Moody's investment Services, I guess, yeah, Moody's Investment Services report that was done, I believe it was in Massachusetts, and they actually looked at the effect that a burgeoning charter school movement was having on certain school district, well, I can't say school districts, but certain municipal localities where school districts were. And they said clearly that it's affecting these municipalities' financial welfare, their financial standing.
Really?
And actually in Massachusetts there was a referendum that came up. It was defeated. And in their analysis of the defeat, Moody's indicated that the financial health of the state of Massachusetts actually had normalized, stabilized, and increased based on the defeat of this initiative for pro-charter school in the state of Massachusetts. So the effect can be not just for your kid in that class in that school district. The ripple effects can be significant.
Can be quite significant.
Absolutely.
And affect everybody.
Yeah.
That is quite incredible. Now, I'm going to say one word to you, and I want to see your reaction.
Okay.
Detroit.
Detroit it's awesome because it gives us a baseline to talk about what the effects of a very, very aggressive push for privatization, charter school movement can do to a large school system and a state school system. The look of gas pain is because the principal proponent of what happened in Detroit and Michigan is now the Secretary of Education. So I
am waiting with bated breath to hear what comes next.
To get these right, I'm actually, because I don't want to pull these out of my butt, I want the numbers. So here's what we have. In 2003, Michigan ranked 28th among the states in fourth grade reading. By 2015, it had dropped to 41st.
Good grief.
In 2003, Michigan ranked 27th in fourth grade math. By 2015, it was down to 42nd. 38% of charter schools that received state academic rankings during the 2012-2013 school year fell below the 25th percentile. Only 23% of traditional public schools fell below the 25th percentile.
I think you should mention where you're quoting this from. I think that's important.
Okay, so the National Education Association had a charter school policy that was last updated in 2001. This summer at the NEA Representative Assembly, call it the RA, and let me just say, this is kind of a cool thing. I love facts. The NEARA is the world's largest democratically elected deliberative body. So you have anywhere between 8,500 and 9,000 educators from all over the U.S. Elected by their peers to come be delegates to the RA. And we debate and set policy for the NEA. So this summer there had been 2 years ago a study group commissioned to look at, do we need to update our charter school policy because of the proliferation of charter schools? Obviously we did. And so this is the report to the delegates at this summer's RA on a proposed new charter school policy. So most of this is a white paper report looking at the data from all over the U.S. on charter schools.
And this really is non-political?
You know, I don't think I'd go that far. I think NEA, as the nation's largest professional association, 3 million members, we have a political view. I mean, I couldn't legitimately sit here and say it's non-political. Having said that, last year's RA was in D.C. And every year there is a Friend of Education Award. And last year the recipients were a Republican senator from Tennessee, and a Democratic senator from the state of Washington. They received the award together. So I think we go out of our way to recognize, regardless of political party, good policy for kids' education.
Right. So all of the facts and figures we know are correct.
They're facts and figures. They're not.
They are true facts, true figures.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Maybe a rarity in
maybe a great rarity.
But yeah, the majority of this white paper is providing the delegates the data on what has changed since 2001, and it's kind of sobering.
Right. Right. The Detroit thing is staggering.
It is.
Well, I mean, what went so terribly wrong in Detroit? Because when we opened the program, we were talking that, you know, apples to apples, charter schools and public schools pretty well balance themselves out. So what went so terribly wrong in Detroit? Because obviously that was just a lead balloon.
Waste, fraud,
it was waste,
abuse. I suspect, and this is complete hypotheses on my part. I think when you're looking at the sums of money that you're talking about, so I think in a previous show we talked about how funding can be, there's federal funding, most of it comes from states, and
yes,
a smaller amount. Federal funding for charter schools in 10 years is well over $1 billion. Now that's just the federal piece of it. That's a lot of money. And I think when you have that piles of money that size sitting on the table,
greed starts to cut in.
And greed can cut in. And when you couple that with an unwillingness, well, several things. An unwillingness to regulate and to provide oversight. When you see this as a means of profit instead of a service to be provided. I mean, well, so just think about this idea of fiduciary responsibility. Every decision these education organizations, these for-profit education management organizations, EMOs, every decision they make by law has to be made in the benefit of their shareholders, not the kids sitting in Miss Johnson's 10th grade classroom trying to learn about Chaucer.
Right.
When it's a government-funded entity, we don't have that. I never have to worry about when I'm going to work with a kid. I never have to worry about is that curriculum, is that test-taking strategy I'm going to teach today, is that cost-effective for? Is somebody going to make enough profit on that? And I think you combine those things. You combine the amount of money. You combine that with a reticence to really do the hard work of looking at accountability, and you look at the profitability. I think it's we're not well served by that. I mean, maybe that's the best way to put it. Our kids just aren't well served by that.
Well, it goes back to my statement. I think it's time to take a big step backwards and relook at how everything is funded. Because there's something very wrong now with the October rule.
Everything.
That to me is making the whole thing seem a little bit farcical, to be honest.
Are you talking about funding in general, or
I'm
just
talking
funding
about
for charter schools?
Funding in general. Because as we talked with the public schools, okay, they have a head count in October. This charter school falls flat on its face. They've suddenly got 300 students to cope with. They ain't going to get the money.
Nope.
The money's evaporated. So there's something wrong there. There really is something wrong there.
Oh,
I know you know.
I agree.
Yeah.
I'm just not sure I know what the solution to that is.
Before we close this particular discussion on charter schools, let's talk a little bit locally.
Okay.
Okay. What's been happening locally with funding of charter schools? Because I know there's been a few wins
So this last legislative session, there were a couple of notable education-related bills that came out of the State House. The first one was, and I wrote the number down there, confusing, so it was 17061, and that was a bill to, the proponents argued that it would normalize funding for charter schools. In reality, and this strains credulity, this bill would have required school districts to allocate money to charter schools on a per pupil basis of any increased funding those districts might get, any mill levies or bonds. Now, let me take a detour here a minute and talk about those two things, because it's really critical in understanding the impact this bill would have had. So Colorado has Tabor and the Bruce Amendment, which means, in essence, that there are significant impediments to raising tax money statewide, right? So raising public education tax money on a statewide basis is near impossible. As a matter of fact, just to throw the numbers out, since the economic downturn in 07, what the state constitution says the state should be funding for public education in Colorado is negative. Between 2007 and now, it's negative $8 billion.
Wow.
So we are already underfunded from the state funding stream. So local funding of schools is critically important. That's the only way we can deal with growth and improvement, right? So if you're tapping into those local funding streams, the effect is much greater than if you were to look at it in state or federal. So this bill would have required school districts to fund charter schools from any locally increased funding, bonds or mill levies. But here's the thing that's astounding. It would have required that even if the charter schools were not in existence when those bonds or mill levies were enacted. So we vote for a mill levy increase in 2008, and a charter school is commissioned in 2017, the school district has to go back and retroactively pull money out of the school system's budget. To go. So we were overjoyed that bill got defeated on the governor's desk. It was a close run thing. I mean, we were that close to having that bill approved. Luckily, Governor Hickenlooper vetoed it. So that was a significant win for education in Colorado.
It just astounds me that anyone could think that that's a good idea. It astounds me.
I don't have an answer for you there.
I'm trying to work out the next new business that I'm going to start that will allow me to do this.
Oh, just do it in another district, please.
I'll do my best.
Yeah. Gentleman's agreement there. Second bill that came out that was actually kind of interesting. It actually, well, and I actually can talk about another bill first. The funding we talked about. So we were on the risk of really going deep into funding deficits in a wonderful bipartisan way. The Democrats and Republicans in the state house got together, and I think there's beginning to be an acknowledgement that these impediments that I talked about aren't letting us function. There were 3 areas that they identified that state funding was becoming damn critical in: hospitals, transportation, and education. And so they were able to jigger the system and at least not let our negative factor, that's what you call this, the money that we're in arrears, not let it go up. So they were able to hold the line this year, which was really a fantastic thing, and hopefully a harbinger of what we're going to see coming out of the House in future sessions. So we were good there. The third bill that came out of the legislature this year, which was really interesting, there's a significant teacher shortage in Colorado, especially on the Eastern Plains. and the original writing of House Bill 171003 was looking at ways to get bodies into classrooms. And notice I didn't say competent, licensed teachers.
Yes.
And so in a lot of give and take, a lot of, be honest, lobbying from Colorado Education Association, we were able to educate legislatures that this probably isn't a good idea. And so the wording ended up getting reworked and changed. And when the bill finally came out, it was very different. And what it asked for was a commissioned a study to look at, to what really is going on. What are impediments to people not wanting to take teaching jobs out on the plains? What can we do to encourage teachers? How do we address the teacher shortage issue in Colorado? So that was I'm very pleased with the way that turned out, because what started out as a real stinker of a bill actually came out to be really productive, and Colorado Department of Education has had a series of listening tours throughout the state this summer. Very productive. I went to one, and there were, in downtown Denver, there were probably 75 educators there, all being asked, what do you think we could do to increase the number of teachers in Colorado? So
right.
Those were, that's local. Those were three things that happened here that were, the outcome for all three was actually very pleasing.
Amazing. Well, that's good.
It is.
That's good.
It is. The middle one I talked about, the bipartisan realization that we've got to be able to do something about education, was very hopeful. In our, where we're sitting right now, St. Vrain Valley School District, we're very lucky. We've had tremendous support from the public when we've gone to them and asked for local monies, and we're really lucky. Neighboring school districts, not so much.
Right.
So I think there's a growing realization that this is unsustainable.
Right.
So
on charter schools,
yes.
is there anything else you'd like to mention? Or do you think we've pretty well covered most of the nooks and crannies?
I think we've covered most of the nooks and crannies.
Okay.
You can so easily get into the weeds of the details.
Yes.
But I just think that the bottom line for me is that when a charter school is not approved by a local school district, when there's no accountability, no oversight, and quite frankly, no need for it, you're just opening it to opening it.
Yes.
It's not serving the taxpayers as it should. It's not serving, more importantly, it's not serving the students. And I think we really need to look at tightening the box that charter schools can operate under.
Yes. No disagreements from me at all.
Excellent. That's a first.
Actually, no, I think it's a second, but that's okay. Once again, thank you very much for joining us here in the studio.
My pleasure.
Thank you for watching this very special version on charter schools from Rational Alchemy. I'm your host, Nigel Aves, signing off. Thank you. You might like to think that by sending your children to a charter school might be highly beneficial academically. But is that true? Well, here are the numbers from all charter schools versus all public schools. 17% of charter schools have been proven to give a better education than public schools. But, and it's a huge but, 37% have been shown to be worse, and 48% actually the same. Please check all of these numbers for yourself, but really, are charter schools really worth the money?